Right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So, my talk is Cringe to Career: How Fanfiction Creates Great Game Writers. So, I'm Ash Poprik, and I'm a game writer, as as most of you already know. Some of my titles include Destiny 2, Black Ops 6, Modern Warfare 3, Marvel Spider-Man 2, and just some miscellaneous Hasbro card and board games. As you can see here, touching a shoulder equals good writing, I guess, in my book. I don't know why, but it speaks to me biblically, I suppose. And as you can see with all of these, that they are all sequels or continuations of a game that is already existing. None of these are original IP. Um, that's honestly something that you will see with a lot of games, especially if you are in a AAA or sometimes even AA space. Um, it's very rare that you will be working on a fully original IP where you're making everything from the ground up. But more importantly, aside from all of this, I grew up being cringe. Yes, I had unrestricted internet access as a kid. I read fan fiction. I wrote fan fiction. In fact, I even gave handwritten Doctor Who fan fiction to my teachers to see if they had any notes. Yeah, I was not very popular in school. So writers write fan fiction, and as you could see from this quote, the difference between writing fan fiction and writing for an established IP is a paycheck. Before I continue, it's important for me to note that fan fiction has been primarily written by marginalized communities, which is a potential reason why it is seen as less valid method of writing than other methods of writing. But fan fiction is a work of fiction that is related to an established franchise. The biggest difference is that it's non-canonical and you usually don't get paid for it. I mean, monetarily, anyways. I'll talk more about this later. You can also consider fandom roleplay forums as another method of fan fiction. The biggest difference is that you are now creating non-canonical stories in a community or team, just as opposed to yourself. Did I explore this too? Yes, I did. And where did I explore it? Yes, I had an OC in the Dance Central forums. I was very prideful of my role in these communities. And again, I want to stress that I was very unpopular in school. But that's okay. In doing this, I was able to get comfortable with the franchise and adjust my writing to match the established IP. And this is a shared experience. Many of your favorite game writers have written or are currently writing fan fiction. So here's an example just of people who have written and worked in games talking about writing fan fiction. I am sure that you have seen some of their work in the wild, and yes, we were all maybe a little bit cringe making fan fiction. So there are many benefits of fan fiction. First, you can have your pre-established characters in a pre-established world with freedom to change it. So examples of this, you could have Overwatch characters in a World War II era, or you can have your OCs creating new relationships conflicts with Final Fantasy characters. When you're writing fan fiction, the community is also rewarding you for familiarizing yourself with the existing fiction. So some examples of this, you're writing for an audience that knows and loves maybe a little bit too much the IP. If you're in AO3 or Wattpad, you can get things like likes and kudos and comments, and that's all on fanfiction sites that are feedback. So if you are curious with how you're doing when writing for fanfiction, you will be able to see this as a form of feedback and you can adjust accordingly. So if there is a character that you're maybe not writing particularly as well as you are others, or if there's a character that you're writing extremely well, and you're getting comments that are showing that, you can lean into that a little bit more, especially if you're writing something that has it's reoccurring and it has more chapters going forward. And then here's that non-monetary payment I was talking about. When you are calling the shots, you can opt for any short story, full novel, just any link that you want, and you can change your mind at any time. So, you could be writing things in multiple chapters and then just decide, okay, you know what, I'm done. And the next chapter can be your last. And it doesn't matter. You're its champion, and nobody is paying you for it. So you can start and stop and continue for as long as you want, or stop whenever you want as well. And kind of also on that, because it's not a paid job, you can write whatever you want with whoever you want in it. There's no pressure, so there's no problem, right? You can have a bunch of fandom crossovers if you wanted, and it's not a problem, right? Because you're not being paid for it, and so you're able to experiment with these different genres and these different fandoms, and they can become something that you end up seeing as future IP. So you might be thinking like, well, fandom crossovers are not really a thing, you don't really see IP crossover, but for example, with Hasbro games, there is actually a series of graphic novels and comics that are Transformers working together with the My Little Pony characters, and that's like official. It's not something that is just based on fan fiction, and that is something that people got paid to write and to illustrate, and it is on the shelves for people to purchase. So it's not something that is just restricted to fandom. It's just something that you can, or to fan fiction, but it's something that you can continue to do in fan fiction to just kind of build your cross IP experience. And if you get really lucky, then you will make a quality trilogy of movies based on them. You do know what I'm talking about. Yeah, yeah. Um, Also, something that I want to say that is a really cool benefit of fan fiction is that you don't even really have to use the computer. If you know how to write by hand, that is also a way that you can write fan fiction. I used to do that the way the pioneers did it. All of my Doctor Who fan fiction, that was on pen and paper, baby. And it's accessible for everybody, which is really, really nice. You don't need to have any special apps or software to write fan fiction. It could be wherever your heart desires. So what's another word for fan fiction? It's a spec script. It's basically fan fiction without the stigma of it being called fan fiction. It could be used for both video games and television. Good spec scripts can get people jobs, representation, awards, money. You could even get writing mentorships, and writing mentorships are often based on how well you wrote for an existing property. Creative directors love recognizing the characters in your three-page cinematic scripts and bios for established characters because they know exactly who you're aiming for and can cross-reference with what they know about the franchise that you chose. So that's a really nice bonus to have, especially if you are making these as portfolio pieces potentially. And though it is uncommon, sometimes the creator can see your work and staff you on it. That has happened before with people that I know. And lastly, you have a cool portfolio piece, but it's just fan fiction with a fancy name on it. So again, uh, creating fan fiction is going to be really beneficial even when you're doing things such as making portfolio pieces for your writing portfolio. Great. So with that all, just to give a little summary of what it is that we learned. So many game writers get their start writing fan fiction and continue to write fan fiction for leisure, which is awesome. Writing an established IP can get people interested in your creative writing. Learning to write for established characters and worlds is a skill to have if you want to be a game writer. And last but not least, the real message of this is that fanfiction isn't cringe. It's an accessible hobby that almost anyone can enjoy. And again, it can get you a career, which is pretty freaking awesome. Great. So I wanted to give just a bunch of extra time for Q&A. So if there are any questions from the audience, please feel free to ask them now. And thank you so much. These are all the ways that you can connect with me. On all social media, I'm just at Ashley Poprik. You can get to my website at ashleypoprik.com. Same with LinkedIn. And if you are interested in more game writing resources, you can check out ashleypoprik.com/resources. Thank you guys so much. All right, let's open it up to questions. Okay, question in the room. How do you feel like writing fan fiction for fun is a different experience than writing for financial incentive? I mean, the one of the bigger differences is just that you are going to be meeting with a lot of other partners. So, for example, when working on a Marvel property like Marvel Spider-Man 2, I also worked on some Marvel card and board games with Hasbro. Basically, you are you're not even spending as much time writing as you are being in meetings with um, Marvel representatives. If you're doing Disney, that's like Disney representatives. You just have a lot less freedom because they have their own needs as well. So, for example, with Clue Disney Villains, which was also a game that I had worked on, um, I was helping suggest basically the characters that were going to be in that roster, but at the end of the day, it was Disney's decision on who the final roster was going to be. And one of the things that they were really pushing for was Maleficent because they have a bunch of testing as well, and what they had learned is that Maleficent is by far the most popular Disney villain. And so I needed to find a way to incorporate Maleficent in this Clue Disney villain story, which is something that you don't really need to do if you are doing it for fun. You don't need to find, hey, what tests well. You're not meeting with business partners or anything. There's not any stakes in it. And so it's really good when you are practicing game writing because there's nobody who is counting on you for it to be a real IP fiction. Yeah, so that's the biggest difference. But of course, all that is to say, like, you have less freedom, you're in a bunch of meetings, and you also get a check for it, which is a really big difference between writing for fun versus doing it for financial incentive. Okay, and then seeing a question in the thread. Have you encountered any problems with developers not wanting any fic/spec scripts in your portfolio? I actually have not. It seems like it is pretty common for you to have something that is from a previous IP, whether that be a fan fiction or sometimes if you are already a writer who has credits to your name, you're sending in a script that is from the game itself. So they're familiar with having characters that are from a video game already, as opposed to being something completely original. What I like to do is kind of have a mix of both in there. I have 4 portfolio pieces that I sent, which you can find just on my homepage at ashleypoprik.com if you're interested. And there is one spec script that is on there, and then the rest are original. But I like to have just like a mix there so that you can see that I know how to write for an established franchise, which ends up being what I get hired for the most. One thing that I will recommend though, and this isn't necessarily like a cardinal sin, but it is basically the one complaint that I hear about fan fiction or speculative scripts as your portfolio, that if you are applying to a company, say, um, let's just say Santa Monica Studio, you would probably not do super well by sending a God of War script unless you are like really, really confident in it. And that is because if you are sending the writers fiction about the characters that they've created, they're going to have a much bigger lens and like microscope on the stuff that you are working on because they have been writing that character day in day out, 40 plus hours a week for months to years. And so sending something that is of their own IP to them directly is just not very beneficial for you, because again, they are going to be looking at that with much more scrutiny than if you were going to be, if I were to send a Spider-Man script to Santa Monica Studio, right? Or to Remedy. So that's just something that I would advise if you are going to have spec scripts. Like I do not plan on sending a spec Spider-Man script to Insomniac. Um, so that's kind of what I use just to send basically the proof that I know how to work an IP to other companies, and that is very useful. But other than that, I haven't encountered any problems. I have got a question for Sahil. If you wanted to use fanfiction in your portfolio, how would you balance your original work with work that is kind of fanfiction but also relevant to the skills needed to be a game writer slash narrative designer? I do like using fanfiction in my portfolio. I usually have one or two for every kind of set of portfolio pieces that I send in. I make sure to have at least one, and then once I can show that yes, I know how to write an IP, then I use the other original work just to kind of support just my original writing, and show that like yes, I also have the I have the capability to have different ideas and thoughts, and I can make original work as well. I'm not just going to be writing something that you've already seen and loved before, but I'm going to be able to elevate that. So always good to have one or two, but don't make it more than half, I guess. And then use the rest of your portfolio to be original work, which from what I see, most places they want to have 3 or 4 different writing samples anyways. Or if they do 10 pages worth, usually I keep my writing samples to 3 pages. And so for me, if you want 10 pages of work, then that would be 3 writing samples for me. And then, okay, question for me. Based on experience, what suggestions or recommendations can you offer aspiring writers when facing writer's block or anxiety when creating fan fiction? I think that writing fan fiction is great for when you have writer's block or when you have just anxiety with writing in general, because these are characters that you already know and love. You're not necessarily being faced as much with like the problem of the blank page, because there's already stuff that exists, and it doesn't have to be for a video game IP. Again, like I was writing Doctor Who fan fiction, and it wasn't even with like the Doctor himself. It was like with the companions. So you could really just like pick whoever you want. And again, it makes it a little bit less scary because you aren't necessarily sharing it with a bunch of people, and you don't have to write it a specific way, and you can pick somebody a character who like the back of your hand, and that just like kind of helps alleviate that a little bit. So if you are experiencing anxiety when creating just in general fan fiction, I would say to start, you can handwrite it. I have done so much handwritten fan fiction, and nobody sees it. So that alleviates a lot of the anxiety, because you know that other eyes are not going to be looking at it. I mean, you can write it, put it in a notebook, and like hide that bad boy away in a closet, or a box somewhere. You could burn it. Um, and so there's some of the anxiety alleviation there. You're just not having to put in front of eyes, and also pick a character or a franchise that you're really comfortable with. There's going to be something that you feel like you know and you love, and that will really help with writer's block, because what are the stories that you would want to tell or even continue in those spaces? Sometimes, especially when I was a kid, okay, again, I was cringe. Okay, the first fan fiction I had ever written was actually for the very first Rayman Raving Rabbids game that was on the Wii. I can, yeah, basically what I had done for that is yeah, see the birthday cake. Yeah, I was. Yeah, this was that time that I was writing fan fiction. I was handwriting it, And it was basically just going through the entire story of Rayman Raving Rabbids, which is really not much of anything, to be honest. I was basically just recounting it, but I was giving like Rayman a little bit more of like an internal monologue and like some emotion there. And he had like he had a friend inside that I made up. But other than that, I was basically just step by step recounting that story, and that's fine. That's also fan fiction. So you don't have to start from square one. You could start with the very end and just like recount. So again, this is just a good way to get started in putting yourself and putting your words in an established like world. And that's a great way to go in. So I hope that answers your question. Let's see. Another question. When dealing with brand parameters, what do you find yourself advocating for the most during the open dialogue of creation with other parties? Character choices or story beats? I find myself honestly advocating for things that are just not told in like other IP before. So for example, with Marvel Spider-Man 2, we were pitching different things that Genki could be doing within the story, and that is going to be more like character choices. He is having this relationship with Miles that we're kind of seeing in the comics, but that is not something that they're focusing a whole bunch of like time and like hours into. So we are pitching a lot of character choices and character arcs, and those can be kind of in the form of story beats, but really we're advocating for that character, and that's something that when you're dealing with partners, that's kind of where you have the most conversation, is just when you're looking to expand the envelope, because you want to make sure that it's new and it's fresh, but that it also still fits very well in line with what they have already had for this character. You want to be able to continue their story and to make it even more just like flourished and have like nuance and all of that, but you don't want to change the character and kind of alienate the fans who have been there before. Are there any other questions? Here we go. Another question. Do you have any tips about working with IP characters who don't necessarily inspire or excite you? Um, I So what I personally do, and I will say I get into different fandoms very very easily. So I will say, for example, with a game like Clue Disney Villains, I'm using that because the things that I have worked on otherwise I've been a fan of previously. But Clue Disney Villains, I had seen the Disney movies and like they were fine, but I wasn't a huge fan of specifically Disney villains. They were just kind of characters for me. And something that I was just exposed to while I was there was the fact that Disney villains themselves have just kind of like their own, they all have their own like fandom and community that is within it, that fans love like certain aspects of, and just seeing that, even though I would say like I am not in the Disney villains fandom, the things that I was learning about the different villains and about the community were just really exciting and fascinating to me. And I would say even still, like, I wasn't necessarily like inspired by it, but just the fascination with the community and the stories of like what was already there was really interesting, because they kind of feel like puzzle pieces and you're trying to figure out how to put them together in a new story context, which for this it was Clue Disney Villains. There is a story attached to it, and it's weird, but it exists. And so I had to find like, okay, what are characters that you know are going to be making sense within the context of the story, building the story kind of around especially like the non-negotiable characters that Disney had, and what are things that they could be doing in this space that is Clue, that is new but still reflects, the characters that this community loves, and different pieces of canon that the fandom is like extra fixated on. So find things, even if it's not necessarily about the IP itself, find things that are about the fandom in community that are really interesting to you. I think it is actually easier to get into these fandoms and these spaces than you would think. Which even, I mean, even Call of Duty, I was not, and I said this even when I had interviewed there too. I was not a fan of Call of Duty. I didn't really care for it. I thought, that it had a lot of room for growth. But the first thing that I had been brought in on was Modern Warfare 3, which I had not played Modern Warfare 2. These are the remakes, not the old ones. So it's a very, very different story. And so I had to get interested in them. And even though I wasn't like the hugest fan of the just like the overall story. I was able to get really excited about different pieces of it and specific characters. And that was the stuff that I then got to lean into a lot more when making Modern Warfare 3. And if there were things that I didn't like, then I was trying to adjust and change those for the sequel without again alienating the audience. And thankfully, when you have a team of people and partners, they are kind of helping steer you to make sure that you aren't going too far off the rails. So I just want to say thank you again so much for coming to my talk. I hope that you found something useful, and thank you again for listening. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach me at any of my socials. I have a contact button on my website, and check out the resources that I have. Thanks again, and have a great rest of your NarraScope. Bye.